Adeneo Embedded is kicking off its partnership with Altera by offering a support package for Altera's Cyclone V system on a chip. We're now ready to begin our multi-part session on getting started with Linux on Altera's Cyclone V. The Cyclone V SoC incorporates an FPGA and hard processor system, in this case an ARM Cortex-A9, into the same chip. This is the board itself. As you can see, it supports a wide variety of peripheral hardware connections. For the purposes of this video, we'll only make use of a few of these. Here's the actual chip, which contains the FPGA and HPS. Above it, we have one of the board's 3 Ethernet ports. This will allow us to establish an SSH connection to the board. Also, in stock images, the board runs a web server that can be used to exercise some of the board's features. This port will allow us to access that web server. To the right of it, we have the microSD slot. Here we'll insert the SD card that holds the bootloader, kernel image, and root file system of the board. On the right-hand side, we have the UART port. This will allow us to interact with the board over a serial connection. Lastly, we have the power switch. Open up a web browser and go to rocketboards.org. Here you'll find all the information you need to get started on the Cyclone V. Click Resources. Here you'll find how-tos and documentation for your board. In this video, we'll be booting from pre-built binaries. Click Booting Linux using pre-built SD card image. Scroll down and make sure you have all the necessary prerequisites before we get started. Once you have all the prerequisites, follow along with me while we flash the SD card. First, we'll download the GSRD release binaries. Next, we'll extract the compressed Linux SD card image from the archive. And then the last thing we'll do is expand the compressed Linux SD card image. Now we'll run this command cat/proc/partitions before and after inserting the SD card to see which device our SD card is. So I ran it first. Now I'll insert the SD card and run the command again. So you can see here that our SD card is on device/dev/SDF. So now we actually write the SD image to the SD card using this command here. And be sure to go back and change this to the right device. This one will take a little while. Once that finishes, we have just one command left to run. This one also can take a while. And now that that command's finished running, we're ready to boot the board. Now that we've flashed the SD card image, all that's left to do is make sure we have everything plugged in before we boot the board. Plug in your Ethernet cable to the top, your USB cable into the UART connector, power supply, and insert the SD card that we just flashed into the top of the board. Before you boot the board, make sure you have Minicom configured on your host machine. Enter the following command, sudo minicom-s. Scroll down to serial port setup and match the options I have here. When finished, exit by saying save setup as DFL and exiting from Minicom. Start Minicom with the following command. Once Minicom is started, switch the board from off to on. You should see traces on the COM port. And there you have it, your board's booting. Log in by typing root and hitting enter. Once your board's booted, cd into the Altera directory to run some of these sample applications. You can also test the SSH connection by finding your IP on the board by running ifconfig. Copy this IP address, open up a new terminal window, and type the following command. That's the IP address of your board. Type yes, and there you have it. We've SSH'd into the board. Notice how our board automatically had an IP address. That's because we're connected to a router here, so make sure your board's connected to a router. Otherwise, this won't work.